Welcome to the smoking room in Highclere Castle. It's a beautiful room with some amazing works of art and with rather wonderful sofas on which we're sitting. And today my guest is Rick Peacock-Edwards, an amazing man who I met first of all through doing some charity work in 2018 when we put on the most extraordinary air display. Well, I didn't, in fact. You did, Rick. And since then, you've written a book, which I've thoroughly enjoyed. It's called Rate of Climb. I really enjoyed it, and I didn't put it down. So here to talk about life, aviation, and the world of the RAF, Rick Peacock-Edwards. So, Rick, I probably haven't given you all your titles, of course.
Oh, don't worry about that.
Because I think you were Air Commodore.
Air Commodore.
Properly, aren't you? So, Air Commodore Rick Peacock-Edwards. And I've met Tina several times over, your lovely wife, who... It is a real partnership, your life together in the RAF, isn't it? As Geordie's and mine is here.
Tina was herself in the RAF. In fact, she was. I met her when I was flying Lightnings in Norfolk at RAF Caldershall, and she was a young air traffic controller. In fact, she thought I was far too old, thought I was baby snatching.
So how long have you been involved in the RAF and aviation and planes, Rick, now?
Really, if I look at it, my father was a Battle of Britain pilot, and he flew Hurricanes in the Battle of Britain. He flew Fairy Battles in France before the Battle of Britain, and then he flew Hurricanes in Malta and then went on to Ceylon, and he's an ace. But I often think how he managed to survive the war, I don't know. He was shot down twice, but he's got quite a few credits to his name. And I've thought about it a lot, and as a pilot myself, I think, how did those people survive in those days? And the fact is, as a pilot, you learn how to survive. If you don't learn how to survive, you die. Simple as that. I spent 34 years in the RAF myself, but I've been involved with aviation, and I left the RAF 20 years ago, and I've really been involved with aviation ever since as well. So I myself have been directly involved for 55 years.
This History Weekend at Highclere, and may there be many others in the future, looks back at World War II, the life of our parents and grandparents through it, and how I suppose they dealt with fear, how they lived well within that time period, never knowing how long it was going to go on for, never knowing whether they would win or not. And there were bombs or the fear of bombs coming from the sky, and I was chatting to someone about the different weapons that were used against all the civilians living in this country. So in some ways, that fear is something which I think we're all trying to live with today, never knowing what's going to precipitate a viral outbreak, very different, but nevertheless something which makes us live in fear. And actually, on my part, to learn how to live with the fear and what I'm happy with carrying on, and I'm sure each of us is coming to grips with that, and perhaps you're better equipped than many of us to do that, Rick.
Well, I mean, it's interesting. I mean, certainly when one's young, one doesn't have much fear, or it feels that way now, looking back at it. But I mean, if I just take those pilots in the war, they were my heroes. My father and the Battle of Britain pilots were my heroes when I was young. They're still my heroes today. And if I'm really honest, they've driven my life. Throughout my life, I've done what they did, which was work hard and play hard. When it comes to fear, and everybody has fear, I've heard it time and again from those who flew in the Battle of Britain. For those of us who've flown in the modern Air Force or what have you, you get fear. You're living with danger all the time. But certainly, sort of I've always found that when I'm in the cockpit, you don't have time to be frightened because you're so busy. The fear just seems to evaporate.
Yes.
It's not there.
It's not there, and it's curious because obviously in the World War II, everybody was very, very busy. Yeah. And this estate, this house, was really busy. There were, Canadian reinforcements. There was, Bomber Command using that, and the land girls. There was the children. Every single inch was being really well used. And I'm absolutely sure that was everywhere. And, Spitfires were being made in houses, in garages, all the parts put together. Everything was being done everywhere at huge speed and with as much care as possible. So it was very, very busy. And with this latest challenge, it's been very, very quiet, and we've had almost too much time. So we haven't been able to get in the cockpit and get on with our lives. We've just been left hanging. So it's been quite interesting. And for us, when we were able to get back and start walking again, you don't have the time. You sometimes still wake up in the middle of the night with the fear, but nevertheless, you're starting to walk. And I hope this weekend is a busy weekend and a way of sharing different stories and to inspire people that there are horizons very close to us, further away and long distance, so we can set off on a journey again. So you describe it far better, but it is interesting times.
Well, I'm sure when I look at those squadrons in the war, but of course it was much more than that. It was a team effort because there was everybody behind it, and there were many females involved in that as well, sort of flying the aircraft, delivering them from the factories to the squadrons, working in the factories. There were the engineers. There were just so many. And if I look at it this weekend, for example, the face of what's happening here, and that's you basically.
But it's a huge team effort.
But it's a team effort. There's a huge team effort going on behind. So all these things it's a team.
It is a team, and that is the joy of it. And everybody else has done quite as much as I have. Yeah. And it's just all somehow or other putting one foot in front of another on one direction. And it's been interesting because when you do things like this, you actually build the teams a little bit stronger because you have to dig much deeper. And we're way outside our comfort zone. I'm way outside my comfort zone. But it's amazing because I think, and we're asking people to come here and enjoy themselves and have a day out, which to start with was possibly also a step outside other people's comfort zone. But we have space, acres of lawn, gardens, large rooms, and I feel comfortable that it's a great day out, and people I hope will leave here cheered and encouraged to keep stepping on.
And I have absolutely no doubt that they will. I mean, this is just a fantastic place. Just going back to the team again a bit, I mean, I think back to my squadrons that I flew on, and when I was flying Lightnings, we had 12 aircraft in the squadron, we had 15 pilots. But we socialised together, we worked together, we played together, we flew together in formation all the time. And you really have to, you've got to trust people, you get to know people. And quite frankly, from my very first tour, which was 50 years ago, we became a band of brothers. And we're still, all of us, in close contact to this day. So it's amazing what the team does in building the bond.
I think it's asking us to find what our community and teams are, because that's what we've missed. But perhaps it's a way of resetting the button and going onwards again. But I really enjoyed your book. You very kindly gave it to me, Rate of Climb. And I just, again, found your courage very inspiring. And the idea of you saw something and you did it. It's easy to talk about things, but it was always, again, planning, preparation, more planning, preparation, and then action, doing, completing, revising. So you've got that very strong process running all the way through it, which inspires confidence in those reading the book and is fascinating. Was there one part of your time with the RAF which stands out above all others, or...?
It was all very special, quite frankly. I travelled the world. I worked with some amazing people. I flew some brilliant aircraft. I did some special things. I really sort of developed a lifetime of experiences. I find it very difficult to pick out one particular thing. I could pick out many events, like introducing the Tornado into the RAF, or like being the first commander to be sent down to the Gulf in the first Gulf War. My time in Washington. There's many things. Quite a few things I have done in my RAF career were firsts. I suppose that was a bit of a claim to fame, really.
I bet it was, Rick. I'm completely honest. I hope that if people are listening to us, they might actually consider a career with the RAF, because it is joining a band of brothers. It's building a set of skills which you can take on to many other jobs later in life if you so choose. The laughter, which was echoing out of the book, and some of the escapades was such fun, actually, Rick. It really was.
Of course, you have to realise there's quite a lot that's not in the book
I
as well.
thought there might be. Quite hard to choose what to include and what not to include. And,
yes.
And you're always making those judgments. And then I don't know, I always let other people read what I'm writing first to say, you should say that. Because there's so many silly things that I've done that I'm not sure I'm yet able to reveal.
I was always determined to tell my story. And in fact, first of all, I'd actually developed a structure for the book. And then I thought, well, I'll wait until I'd spoken to a publisher, which I did eventually, and then he came back to me and he said, I think it's brilliant, Rick, I'll write it. So I said, OK, well, I'm a fighter pilot, I don't write, I fly aircraft, you can write it for me. And after about 3 or 4 years of interviews and photographs and things like that, and then nothing was produced. And eventually, cut a long story short, I gave him the marching order, and I said the only way this book's going to get published is if I write it myself. And that was actually I found that a very pleasant challenge, doing it, really dug down into my grey matter and sort of getting it all coming out. Once I got writing, I really enjoyed it, and it was me. It was me, and I've always been a very positive person.
And that shines through every page, and I think that's in particular why I really enjoyed it, because I was turning the pages and imbibing your positive spirit, which particularly helps again when you're looking around wondering where to find positivity. And I think, the RAF and yourself and all the other men who you were writing about just were imbued with it.
My book was reviewed by the Air Cadets, and people don't know that there are nearly between 40 and 50,000 Air Cadets in the UK, which is many more people than are actually in the real Royal Air Force. And my book was reviewed, and it was a very positive review. And I was pleased about that, because the message that's going across to the Air Cadets is, there's something in here for you. You want to read the story and listen to it, because it'll help you sort of move into your careers and upwards and onwards from there. And I do agree with that. I want to give back as much as I've got so much out of life. I've had such a magnificent life involved with aviation in the RAF and afterwards. I'm still very involved with the RAF in many different ways. I wouldn't change a thing that I've done, and that's written in my book, I think. I really wouldn't. I've just had the most exceptional life, and I would recommend a career in the RAF or aviation to absolutely anybody. And it's interesting, I still have a fairly big connection with the Air Cadets myself. To this day, I'm mentoring a few of them.
Good.
In fact, they've come to me and said, will you mentor me? And I've said, yes, I will. And I've taken them through.
Yes.
And they're all doing, they're developing. Well, some of them are still coming up, but...
Fantastic. But I remember actually when I first met you, because of course I'd been chatting to Steve Bohill-Smith about trying to mark the end of the First World War and make it a weekend of collaboration and friendship and also marking the achievement of the RAF and an air display. And Steve Bohill-Smith is so enthusiastic and so wonderful, and he said I had to meet you, and he obviously dragged you along here, and you were just so wonderful, because it's again I know I'm out of my depth with putting on air displays, and you and he and George Bacon, who's also a remarkable man, took it on, and I can't thank you enough for all your support as we have gone along. It's been quite something what this little team at Highclere, because this is a team, and you and your teams have pulled off here extraordinary memories, and people still write to me today remembering it, saying what an amazing time they had. And this History Weekend, I hope, will begin. It's an inaugural History Weekend and will continue for many years, which will be good. And
I think it will. I feel deeply privileged to have been involved here in helping you running the air display in 2018, and
so kind. And
my involvement again this year. So no, it's been a privilege. I'm definitely a can-do man. You're definitely a can-do person as well, and I'm full of admiration for people who can do.
It's one of the most important things, because a lot of people sit round and discuss what they might do, and sometimes they poke fun at people for what they are doing, whereas I think in some ways those who try to do something, and when it doesn't work out, the courage is always in standing up and trying again. And I imagine for when your father was shot down, twice in World War II, that the courage must have been getting back in the cockpit after each time. I think that must be the memories which flash back of how you got yourself out of the last escapade. to get back in it again is
I've got a lovely photograph of my father. The second time he was shot down was when he was in Ceylon, where incidentally he was on his way to Singapore when Singapore fell with his Hurricane squadron. They were an aircraft carrier, and he got diverted into. So the squadron went into Ceylon, where just so happened he met my mother, who was the daughter of a Ceylon tea planter, in fact. So that was a bonus for me. The Japanese attacked Ceylon on Christmas Day, on Easter Sunday, 1942, and he shot down a couple of Zeros and got shot down himself. He actually crash-landed in a paddy field. There was a lovely photograph of him. He got taken off to hospital with shrapnel in his eyes and a few other places, but he got fed up with Beacon Hospital. I've got a lovely photograph of him walking out of hospital, unfortunately with a cigarette hanging out of his mouth.
My grandfather I'm so sorry he wasn't in the RAF, he was in the Army, General in the Royal Engineers, and he was always smoking and the odd cigar, and my father was the same. I think my father started smoking behind the bike shed at school when he was 14 and never stopped, so apart from the odd cigar as he went.
When I was a youngster, I smoked too. In fact, I did smoke for a while, and I stopped smoking just before I got married when Tina, my wife, my fiancée then, she said to me, if you stop smoking, you give up cigarettes, I'll buy you a car radio. That shows what we had in the cars in those days. So she bought me a car radio. I stopped smoking and she bought me a car radio, and I haven't smoked since.
That was a very good deal. They all looked very debonair and kind of very racy, with all the flak jackets and the hats. And he was shot down once in Ceylon. Where was the other time?
The other time was in Malta.
Did he land in the sea, or what happened?
No, he crash landed the aircraft. I've got a photograph. I've got his logbook, in fact, here today, and there's a photograph of the aircraft that he crash landed in, sort of a broken back. He never bailed out. Both times he actually got the aircraft on the ground.
Wow.
But a very bent aircraft.
And did he end up again in hospital, presumably?
Not on the first one. No, he was back in the air either that afternoon or the next day.
My goodness.
So he had quite a war, and he spent the first 9 months of the war in France flying ferry battles. And for anybody who was flying ferry battles in France, most of them were shot down, and most of the ferry battle pilots were killed. So, I often think when he survived that, and then he survived the Battle of Britain, survived the Siege of Malta, the Battle of Malta, survived onwards and then into Ceylon. That's why I say, they do say luck comes into it, but you make your own luck.
You do. I think experience helps, and I think experience has helped us all, again, in our current situation. The experience that Geordie and I have had over the last 15 years of trying to run Highclere, we've used every single little corner of it to get through this part. And then I hope, in terms of the overall strategy, to remain calm about it. And without a doubt, you need to have a clear head to make clear decisions in difficult times, which are objectively driven without subjectivity, and which are the result of having listened to many people and discussed it and then gone away and had the time to reflect. Perhaps when you're flying a plane, the experience and the training would give you the best split decision options to take, and then I suppose going backwards, the experience would help us when you have to make quite decisions again here, which way to go. But it is experience of getting older is bloody useful, actually. I
think you summed it up beautifully. I think the training is so important, but the experience, the more you're experienced, and the more you can cope. You develop and you develop as a team, and you work as a team, and all that relates to training as well and experience. So there's no substitute for training. But of course, in the Second World War, they didn't have too much time for training in some places.
Training is important. It's all about processing. It's all the boring things at school which become very useful later on. So when you left the RAF, did you have a clear idea, Rick, of where you were going after that? Is there
In my last year in the RAF, before I had to retire, I was actually headhunted into a big aerospace company. I did think to myself, I thought, well, what am I going to do when I leave the RAF? Am I going to stay with aviation, or am I going to do something totally different? Well, it didn't take me too long to think. I thought, well, I've had 35 years. I've had a fantastic 35 years in aviation. Why would I want to change now? Yeah. So it was a no-brainer, quite frankly. I had no idea sort of where my life was going to go sort of in my after Air Force career, which is 20 years now, but it's been a fascinating journey. I've done a lot of things in that time that I never thought I would do that have happened. And I've had opportunities that have jumped up in front of me that I've taken. I do feel very fortunate in many ways. And certainly at times I've been in the right place at the right time.
But isn't that because you've actually been working hard and if you're working hard and you're out there, you're more likely to be in the right place at the right time?
And I've certainly found that I've always been, I'm a willing, hard worker, positive, can-do man. And yes, opportunities do come my way. People come to me with asking me to join them. And I was listening to an interview the other day with the last surviving Battle of Britain pilot. There's only one pilot left alive. He lives in Ireland. And he was shot down and survived 4 times, including sort of once when his parachute didn't open. His fall got broken by a tree, and that saved him. And I remember he said, I was lucky. He said, but my squadron commander, for example, who he said was, as far as he was concerned, was the best pilot he'd ever met, was shot down and killed at the first attempt. He said he didn't have the luck, I had the luck.
Wow.
I think luck obviously comes into it.
Well, there's a very powerful poem by Yeats, isn't there, called The Airman. Slightly more melancholic and less positive, but it does always make me think, but that was a lucky Irishman then.
Anybody who gets to that age, I think, what an amazing people they are.
Did you need a specific skill set from school to get into the RAF?
You certainly needed a specific skill set. I mean, I had to go through, because I grew up in South Africa, I did my aptitude tests with the University of the Witwatersrand, Johannesburg University, where I'd actually been a student. I did my medical tests with the South African Air Force, and I did my interviews in a magnificent house in Pretoria, which was the home of the British Defence Liaison staff there.
Right.
So, yes, I mean, medically is where most people fall down with poor eyesight, colourblind or something like that. So I guess I was fortunate that I didn't have any of those medical problems that stop people from flying. Certainly sort of and they do test your sort of
spatial aptitude
and thing, and yes, and particularly here in the UK, they do sort of aptitude tests, a whole day of them, to check your sort of whether you're capable. Certainly I think one of the characteristics I had, I've always been fairly coordinated, but sort of mentally as well, mathematics is supposedly sort of my strongest subject, or it always comes out that way in aptitude tests, and you certainly need that. You need a mathematical mind to some extent. And
if you don't want to go into fly the planes, presumably there's other jobs around in the RAF which they're also looking for if you've got less spatial aptitude or...
There's some fantastic jobs, and in fact even more so these days, because of course unmanned aircraft are beginning to come online.
Yes.
So other jobs are sort of gaining in sort of importance. Well, they're all important, quite frankly, but there's so many opportunities in the RAF today, whether it be it flying or air traffic control or involved with engineering or cyber security or operations. There's a wealth of careers there. And of course it does give you fantastic training. Which
we're back to the subject of training, because I mean my own training I suppose was as a chartered accountant, so I don't know whether you... But my maths is not that good, so I had to work really hard to take the maths through. It's a good training. It's that discipline about planning, process, completion, presentation, and reviewing the whole time. So training is so important, and there's not that many careers which offer you such a wonderful training, are there?
There aren't. To be quite frank, I always wanted to join the RAF, but I didn't think I could from South Africa. But when I discovered I could, and I applied, I got it. But on the way, I'd done other things. I'd been a management trainee with Lever Brothers, and also I'd done time... I was going to be an accountant at one stage myself. I'd even done a couple of years as an article clerk.
Had you? Well, I did 5 years in my accountancy firm, and it was, again, a good training. My father was an articled clerk and went on to become an accountant. I'm not sure he necessarily wanted to, but he quite wanted to be a diplomat. But after World War II, his family had run out of money, so he did that. Nevertheless, retained his sense of humour and interest in people and businesses, and and trying to do what he could to save them, actually. So it's a different way of serving. Rick, thank you. I hope there might be some really interesting questions from this, and I hope it'd be quite fun to do a Zoom call together if there were any interest later on. It'd be wonderful.
I would be delighted at any stage to talk about any aspect, quite frankly.
So I hope if there are some amazing students who are stuck inside in houses in the northeast or northwest of this country for the next 2 weeks, perhaps we can all Zoom together and talk about things they can do in the future.
Be delighted.
Or find out more about your father, because I've so enjoyed chatting to you as ever and hearing about your father, and I hope when all this is over you'll be able to return to come and have lunch with Tina as well, who I never see enough of. But thank you, Rick, so much.
Thank you, Lady Carnarvon. You're very
lunch,
kind.
You're saying, yes. Joking. Thank you so much for listening to this week's podcast. I don't want you to miss out on the next one, so please do try and press the subscribe button.